Wemby is a great player, but I don't really think you can be dominant when you shoot jumpers a lot. I think if he was an inside player at 7'5", the answer would be yes. But when you shoot jumpers, you're always going to go up and down. Coach can tell you that. But he's a fine player. I wish him well, and I'm just glad after not being in the league so long to still have my name in that category.
Yep. So Shaq had those comments to make the other day about Victor Wembanyama, and obviously this comes as no surprise. Shaq is very critical of any big man that has played that position since he has retired. It is no surprise that Shaq is going to be overly critical at times of guys who are like 7 foot plus, overly critical of their playing style and things of that nature. That has been a theme of Shaquille O'Neal since he started doing a lot of commentary and since he left the game of basketball as a player. Now, first question is this, because people say this a lot about Shaq after he usually makes these comments. They call him a hater, an old head, all of those things. Is Shaq a hater? I don't think so. I think Shaq's perception on how big men should play was molded by the era that he played in. And I think that era was the golden era of big man play in NBA history. He played against guys like David Robinson, Hakeem Olajuwon, Patrick Ewing. Himself, he's arguably the greatest big man of all time. I usually put Hakeem in that particular position, but I can hear and understand any argument for Shaq being number one on that list. So his perception on how big men should play is going to be based off of that. And I can't blame him. Those guys that I named are amazing players. Those guys that I named are first ballot Hall of Famers and are some of the most skilled to ever play that particular position. Like the 90s era of big men, if we look at those guys, it was the perfect blend of skill, finesse, and also physical dominance. Those guys made those things clash together very well. It wasn't a thing like X player wasn't able to use his size to his advantage. He just liked to play a game of finesse, dribble the ball around. He fell in love with his jumper. No, those guys could do all of those things, but they found a way to make it all come together, and it blended absolutely perfectly. They knew how to use all of those things together in one, and that's why they were able to be so dominant. So Shaq's perception on how big men should play is kind of based off of the era he played in, which, as I said, is one of the best eras, if not the best era of all time when it comes to big man play in NBA history. You can't get mad at that. It's like hip hop. I always use hip hop or rap as an example. We talk about a lot of older rappers. They're going to be very critical of rappers of this generation because some of the values are different, right? Those guys in the 90s really value their pen. They really value their ability to write and those sorts of things. And right now, a lot of these guys aren't valuing that as much. There are a lot of guys who are having other people write for them and things of that nature. I can understand why people would be disappointed, right? I understand why some people who are looked at as the OGs or whatever particular genre or sport or whatever they played in, I can understand why they'd kind of look down a bit on younger generations because some of the things that they valued at that time isn't being valued as much in this modern era. Sometimes it can come across as hate, but as I said, I can understand the perspective here and there. So I know that was a pretty left field example, but Shaq is the same way. A lot of his opinions on how big men should be playing are molded off of the era that he played in, which, as I said, is simply the greatest era of big man play in NBA history. So I understand why his standard is so high and why he looks at things the way he sees things, because he played during an era that was the standard. It was the ultimate standard. Like talking about guys like Hakeem Olajuwon, could do everything, could shoot the ball, could handle the ball, could pass it. He knew how to make all of those things come together where it didn't look like he was lacking in one area or the other. Like if we talk about Joel Embiid, to kind of contrast it, a lot of people are critical of Embiid because they say things like he falls in love with his jumper too much, he foul hunts, and it comes across as quote unquote soft. I don't think any NBA player is really soft, but you get what I mean, right? Some people are critical of Embiid's play style because sometimes it doesn't feel like he's truly embracing his physicality and his size advantage that he has over a lot of people. That's not the case with a lot of guys that played in the 90s, even some of the non-all-star big men. Those guys knew how to make all of those things fit. Didn't look like they were focusing on just one area. They knew how to make everything kind of come together perfectly. So as I said, of course, Shaq's perception on how big men should play is going to be the way it is because of the era that he played in. But there are limitations to that conservative basketball mindset. Coaches now are much more experimental than what they were in the 90s. So coaches now are going to allow players to do different things, right? And they're going to find more creative ways to be effective. So I think Shaq and a lot of older basketball fans, older basketball players who are really critical of this era have to take that into account. Coaches are finding different ways to utilize their players. The game has been revolutionized since the 90s, right? The game is played in a completely different way. Spacing was not emphasized as much in the 90s, early 2000s, and things like that. It is now. Now you have to have at least four guys in the court who can really shoot the basketball. So I'm using that as an example to say this. Coaches are going to approach the game differently. So they're going to use different guys in different spots. So just because you are a 7-foot guy doesn't mean you should be pigeonholed to playing down low on the post. There may be other things that you can do. So Nikola Jokic, great example. If you can pass the ball, if you can dribble the ball like you can as a big man and shoot it, we're going to utilize that skill set. And aesthetically, it may not look as dominant as it did in the 90s, but it is still very effective for us. And sometimes coaches could be doing themselves a disservice of limiting certain players to do certain things, right? There's a skill set that some of these guys have that coaches just have to call on. So if you're Victor Wembanyama, perfect example, a coach has to use your full skill set. You are too talented to be relegated to just playing down low. And I'm not saying Shaq was saying that about Victor Wembanyama, but he was almost getting there. A coach is going to utilize Wembanyama as a player who's going to be able to shoot, who's going to be able to handle the basketball. There are going to be things Wemby is called to do that a lot of guys in the 90s weren't called to do because he has the skill set. And a coach will be doing himself a disservice by not calling on that skill set that Victor Wembanyama has. And on top of that, here's why I also think Shaq is just wrong about Victor Wembanyama. Victor Wembanyama is very dominant inside. Like if you look at him, he played last season. He will shoot threes. He will play the perimeter game. But when Wemby got the ball into the paint, he's dunking everything to the point where I don't know why Shaq would be this critical of Wembanyama when it comes to him playing down low, because Wembanyama is like an old school type of big man where he gets the ball down low. If he gets it close near the basket, everything is going to be counted as a finish. He's not coming up short. He's finishing over anybody. The way he plays is like reminiscent of guys in the 90s where if he gets the opportunity, he's dunking it. If he gets the opportunity, he's going to make a dominant play around the basket. He's got that blend of having that physical dominance around the basket and also utilizing that great all-around skill set and making those things fit together perfectly. He's got that 90s big man type of trait that I just talked about where he has those physical advantages, knows how to use them, and also knows how to use his great all-around basketball versatile skill set. So that's why I was a bit surprised as to why Shaq was critical of Wemby, because Wemby knows how to make those things come together and make those things fit, not to mention his dominant paint presence as a defensive player. So I get some of Shaq's criticisms for some other big men, like maybe a Joel Embiid or some other guys, but for Wemby, not so much, because Wemby plays a style of basketball that I thought Shaq would enjoy. He'll use his skill set. He'll use the ability to shoot, pass, and all of those things, but he will also use his size and his physical advantages to his advantage. So that's what I didn't get about the comment Shaq made about Wemby, is because I feel like Wemby does not fit that mold of big men who want to do things because they can just do things and don't know how to use their physical attributes. Wemby knows good and well how to do those things. In his first season, he was one of the best paint presences in the league, one of the best defenders in the league. So I think Shaq's kind of got the wrong guy with those particular comments. So like I said, it rings true for some guys that Shaq talks about, but Wemby, not so much. Wemby knows how to make all of those things come together. Like I said, in a way, he's very similar to a lot of those bigs that we saw play the game in the 90s, because as I said, they had that skill, that finesse, and that physical dominance, and they knew how to make those things blend with one another. Wemby knows how to do that too. And I would think that Shaq would enjoy that a lot more than be critical of it. I'm not saying he doesn't enjoy watching Wemby's game, but Wemby doesn't have a style of play. And also, this is something that we'll see over the years. But from what we've seen so far, I don't think Victor Wembanyama has a problematic style of play. Joel Embiid has a problematic style of play. Like, that's a player where you kind of look at him and you're like, some of this won't translate. So the foul hunting and all of those things, that is a problematic style of play at times. Wemby doesn't have a problematic style of play. play. He plays the game the way I think he should play the game. He has a large skill set that he knows how to utilize, and he also knows how to utilize his physical advantages that he has and possesses over a lot of other players in the league. So I get Shaq's perception, but the perception trying to apply that to Victor Wembanyama, I really, really think he's got the wrong guy. So it goes both ways. I think he's wrong about his comments when it comes to Wemby in particular, but I don't think Shaq is a hater. I understand why he's very critical. His perception, as I said, is based off the era that he played in, which was, as I said a million times in this video, the best era of big man play, in my opinion, in NBA history. So also this, like I said a couple of minutes ago, with Wemby, time will tell. Maybe there are some things about Wemby's game that are like consistent limitations to him, like we saw with Joel Embiid. When he came in the league, we looked at him as this future dominant big man, but as time went on, we saw he had these issues that kind of limited him once playoff time kind of got started, right? So with Wemby, only time will tell about some of his weaknesses that'll kind of pop up. It's tough to kind of make this large analysis of Wemby after just 1 year, which was a very impressive first season. But we'll see with Wemby as time moves on. We'll see if Shaq's comments end up aging well as time moves on. But just based off of what I'm already seeing, I think it's very tough to be critical of Victor Wembanyama's style of play. Again, I see Shaq's perspective, but applying it to Wemby, even though it's early, I'm not 100% sure about that. So I think Shaq is wrong here. But again, like I said, only time will tell. Who knows, in a few years down the road, his comments and his opinions on Wemby may end up ringing true.